Current Affairs.
This is Akashvani. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you an exclusive interview with Dr. Saurabh Garg, Secretary, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, on upcoming revision of key economic indicators GDP, IIP and CPI. Interviewer is Arjun J. Chaudhuri, anchor.
A warm welcome to our followers on Akashvani. On this special program, on this podcast, we will discuss about the base year revision of three macroeconomic indicators: Gross Domestic Product, Index of Industrial Production and Consumer Price Index. We'll try and understand from our expert who's with us in the studio as to what is the relevance of these three key macroeconomic indicators for not only the average individual citizen of the country, but to the world in general. Why is it that everyone relies on the accuracy of these data sets? And for that, we are joined by Dr. Saurabh Garg, who is the Secretary at the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Dr. Garg, good to have you on this podcast, and I'm sure our followers in Akashvani will have a better insight into how key macroeconomic indicators are computed.
Thank you.
We'll try and understand from the discussion in terms of what the components of the macroeconomic indicators are. Like for GDP, you have consumption, investment, government spending and net exports. Why the base year is so relevant. You have the index of industrial production, where mining, manufacturing and electricity are the main components, and then you have tied it with the 8 core industries. Dr. Garg, for the benefit of our followers on Akashvani, try and explain to us what base year is.
The base year is required in all these macroeconomic indicators because when you are comparing, let us say, growth, you need to compare it with something. So if the price of something is today is 110 rupees and you want to compare it with a price earlier, that earlier price or that earlier level is known as the base year. Internationally, for GDP, IIP, CPI, every country decides the base year and that base year keeps getting updated. So for a comparison, you always need to compare anything with something, and that is called the base year, that what you are comparing today's level with what. So that's why, for example, prices. You need to look at today if something is priced at 150 rupees. You want to look at it 3 years back, 5 years back. But if you keep changing the base from which you are comparing, then you will not have an idea how things have changed over time. So that's why you have a base year, but you need to update that frequently. And that's the reason that base year is important. It's like when you are playing football, people say, don't change the goalpost. So it's like having a fixed goalpost and knowing where you are from that and how far you are from that. That's the basic concept of a base year.
Typically, when we talk about macroeconomic indicators and the relevance of it, it's always compared to the data coming out from institutions like the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, IMF, which is why it is so important to understand how the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation actually computes it. So to understand what the base year is in a fast changing economic environment, I can understand the logic behind that. But in terms of the changes that have already occurred in the economy, like for instance, you have digitization today, you have startups like green energy. How does the data set adjust to that?
So what we are now doing in the rebasing exercise is, one of the reasons why we need the base year is, as I mentioned earlier, that we need a base for comparison. And over the past 10 years, there have been a number of changes that have happened. For example, the structure of the economy has changed. You have digitization that has happened. You have new sources of energy that have come up, renewable sources, and the consumption patterns of people. So for all these reasons and a combination of these, the structure of the economy has changed. But normal, it changes every few years. It's just that the rate of change is much more these days. So that's one reason that we need to update the base and relook at the structure of the economy that we are rebasing to. The second reason why we need to do is that new data sources come up. And especially in the last 10 years, there's been extensive digitization. And therefore, you have new data sources like e-Vahan, which gives real-time data of motor vehicles, scooters, etc. You have the public financial management system, which gives a real-time data of expenditures that have happened in the government right to the village level. And most importantly, you had the introduction of the goods and services tax, the GST. So that has thrown up a whole set of digital data that is available, which tracks the economy in a much more granular manner than it was. So a host of new data sources that we have, which we didn't have earlier. And the third reason is, as you mentioned, the international organizations look at all this data. The United Nations Statistical Commission, they set out the international guidelines and the protocols, and methodological changes happen from time to time of the economy and these macroeconomic aggregates. So to incorporate the methodological changes which the international organizations are suggesting, there's a need for change of the base. So it's a combination of the structure of the economy, the consumption patterns and etc., the data sources that become available, and the methodological changes that need to be done. The second question could be that why have we chosen 22-23 as the base year? That's the year that we are now moving to for GDP and IIP. For the consumer price index, earlier we were based using the 2012 base, now we are using the 2024 base. One of the reasons for that is that some of the earlier years, 1920, 2021, were impacted by COVID, and therefore that impacted consumption patterns, that impacted industrial output. And 22-23 year was the first normal year in the economic sense that is there. And in order to be able to come to a new base year, we need to do a number of other activities also to understand what were the consumption expenditure patterns in that year. We do a survey which we did for 22-23 and then the results came out in 24. And all that preparatory work we have been able to complete on the new base year of 22-23. And that's the reason that on February 12th of next month, we would be coming out with the consumer price index in the revised base of 2024. And in the end of February, the revised GDP figures based on the year of 22-23. And IIP will come out later in May. So all these figures, all these macroeconomic aggregates will incorporate the changes that I mentioned about the structure of the economy, the new data sources, and the methodological changes. And we hope they will give a much more robust and accurate picture of the Indian economy.
Dr. Saurabh Garg, my sense is that these data sets, GDP, IIP, CPI, are instrumental in decision making. You mentioned about GST, what the rates are in the different slabs, for instance. And a lot of that has been derived from the consumption pattern, which is a key component of gross domestic product. The other that I'm getting a sense of, Dr. Garg, is projection. You mentioned about GDP, second quarter 8.2%, and now you have for the entire financial year, it's 7.4%. And that the comparison is with what's coming out from ADB, IMF, World Bank, for instance. So again, we're looking at reliability, accuracy, and you mentioned about relevance as well. There's also the other aspect, because the typical individual citizen is thinking about prices. What is it going to cost them? Or how is their standard of living? Has it improved? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? How do they plan for the future? Wages. It's all tied to employment as well. Businesses are looking to hire labor. They have to give the best possible wages to them. It has to be competitive as well. So I believe a lot of this is tied to what you're doing with these key macroeconomic indicators, your CPI, IIP, and gross domestic product.
So as you mentioned correctly, these macroeconomic aggregates are used extensively, both domestically and internationally. Let me just start with the consumer price index, which is commonly known as the price inflation. This is a key parameter which is used by the Reserve Bank of India while determining the monetary policy. And by mentioning monetary policy in more common terms, it means setting the interest rates. And those interest rates impact both on the deposits, fixed deposits, for example, which people would be making in the banking system, or in getting the loans, the interest rate on the loans, whether for houses, for a personal consumption, or at an industrial level. A lot of this is based on the CPI numbers. It's not entirely based on CPI, but it forms an important input to the Monetary Policy Committee, which meets periodically to determine the interest rates. That is something which a lot of the followers would be impacted by. For example, we have seen that in the last 1 year, 8 to 10 months, inflation rates have been extremely low. And not only overall inflation rates, which is called headline inflation, but even of different components, whether it's food or other consumer. And the reason for that is because there's low inflation. So because of this low inflation, you would have noticed that the Monetary Policy Committee has taken that into account, and the repo rate, which is called as the rate by which the banks get the funds, that has consistently come down. And for the consumer, it means that the interest rates that they will get loans, etc., are also coming down. So this is just one of the major uses I'm giving of CPI. But you must also understand that how the CPI is calculated. We have set of our field staff which goes to markets and shops on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on regularly, to nearly 2,500 markets which are statistically identified on a random sampling basis.
So the foundation is a survey, basically.
Is a survey, exactly. So people go to shops, find out what is the price of a particular items. There are nearly 350 odd items which are surveyed, and these 350 items are based on what was the consumption pattern of individuals, and based on that. In fact, that's the reason when I was just talking earlier that why do we need the rebasing. These 350 items had been decided earlier based on the consumption patterns in 2011-12. These consumption patterns have changed, and therefore the new consumption patterns, the new items, which will be somewhere around 400 odd, are based on the consumption patterns that people are consuming now. And therefore, it becomes a much more accurate picture of the inflation. I just wanted to mention the methodology. So you can just imagine that you have 350 items and 2,500 markets, and each market is visited at least once a month for each item. So you have 250 into 2,500. So millions of data points, which then calculate on the basis of which the consumer price index is calculated.
So, Dr. Garg, we can compare it to what we were eating 2011 and 12 and what we are eating today. It's a change. Our tastes have changed. We are consuming less of something, more of something, and all of that has to adjust when it comes to the survey, because all this information is being collated. And my sense, Dr. Garg, is that it's also helping in policy making of the government. For instance, what the budgetary allocation should be in a particular industry, what is the GST rate for a particular item or a commodity, just based on these consumption patterns. What is good for you? What is bad for you? So the health benefits of something that's being consumed. I think the benefits, it has a multiplier effect.
Yes.
That's my sense.
Absolutely. So I was just talking of the CPI. Now coming, for example, to GDP figures. GDP and the index for industrial production. The index for industrial production gives an idea of what are the kind of production of different industrial products that are happening, and this comes out on a monthly basis. And as I mentioned about the structure of the economy has changed, some new products have come up. So this gets reflected in the rebasing of the IIP that, for example, electronic products were not so much prevalent in 2011-12, are much more now. There would be similarly other products which were continued and they have become much more prominent now. So all the structure of the economy gets reflected in the weights that we attach to the different industrial products and industrial sectors, and that gets reflected in the IIP. And this is crucial because it also determines and gives an idea, for example, what are the kind of investments happening, where is it that the growth is happening of products and therefore more investment is needed. And the GDP is a larger figure because it encompasses everything. And that gives an idea of what is happening to growth, what is happening to different sectors of the economy, where the consumption expenditure is happening, where capital formation or the common term for that investments are happening. All of that gets captured in the national accounts or the GDP accounts. And these are also very important not only for decision makers, as you mentioned, for budget making. It gives an idea of what the expected revenues can be from different sectors, which gets incorporated into budget making and helps to forecast for the next year what are the kind of revenues and expenditures one can expect. And the better idea we have of the previous year's expenditure, the better would be the forecast that would come up. And that's why the reason for the basing to happen, so that the future forecasts are so much more accurate. And it's not only domestically that these figures are used. It's used internationally when you compare nations. For example, the most common comparator which is used internationally is what is the GDP growth rate. You say a nation is doing well with the GDP growth rate. What is the productivity is another factor. And I must say that India continues to be the fastest growing nation. We have been so for the past more than a couple of years. And it is expected to remain that way. And that's the point that you were making of the Goldilocks period, that currently we have low inflation and high growth. And I think a lot of the interventions of the government keep that in view, that what is the expected inflation, what is the expected growth rate, what is the expected investments, both domestic and foreign. And that determines a lot of the policies of the government, which get reflected not only in the budget, but in a number of other pronouncements that happen from time to time.
So earlier, there were theoretical explanations of, we need to move away from agricultural productivity to manufacturing productivity and wean away from services a little bit so that our manufacturing actually goes up in its share of GDP. But with IIP, you have manufacturing, which is about 78%. That is a weightage in the IIP itself.
Yeah, so let me just mention that the focus of IIP is only manufacturing and industry. So it takes care of mining, it takes care of electricity and what is traditionally called manufacturing. We have a separate index on the services side and agriculture is separate. So the GDP takes care of agriculture, industry, manufacturing and services together. And when we talk of productivity improvement, obviously for growth, you need productivity improvements in all sectors, whether it's agriculture, whether it's manufacturing and whether it's services. And if we look at where a lot of the employment comes from, a lot of employment generation is happening in the services sector.
Exactly.
And services now touching nearly 2/3 of the economy. They are between 55 to 60% of the economy. And the services provide a lot of employment across the nation. Services are growing not only in the tier 1, tier 2 towns, they are growing across the nation, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's transport, whether it's trade, whether it's hotels and restaurants. So the host of services are there and all of them are generating employment. And obviously the need is to improve productivity in all sectors.
So when we talk about prioritizing, because, you have funds, you need to prioritize. Again, a decision is being taken. You mentioned about consumer electronics. So we are very export competitive in the consumer electronics sector. A lot of your schemes are based on the data that is coming out from your ministry concerned. Your PLI scheme, for instance. How do you prioritize what to manufacture, what your target markets are, and I believe a lot of skilled employment also associated with the priority sector itself. For your Skill India, there's a lot of codependence that is being created as a result of the data that's coming out from these figures.
So in fact, the motto of our ministry is data for development. So whatever data we produce is focused on what is needed for development of the country. And the decisions or the policies that are made on a host of data sources. No doubt the GDP data forms a very important bedrock for any decision. But every ministry needs a host of data to make policy interventions. For example, even we bring out regularly data on the labor market situation. What is the employment figures? What is the unemployment figures? In fact, today is the 15th. We just brought out the monthly data today. And these give indicators of where skilling is required, of what kind of education people are having and what kind of skills are required. The IIP gives an idea of what are the kind of growth rates in different sectors of the industry and therefore where it is required. I mentioned earlier about the household consumption expenditure. So depending on what products people are using, it gives an indication to industry of what are the products that need to be manufactured. You have in the GDP, which incorporates imports and exports. So what are the products that are being imported and where we need greater Atmanirbharta. So that gives a cue on what needs to be done. So obviously the decision making that is done by the different ministries, they no doubt take a lot of the data that we produce. But apart from that, there are a lot of other inputs would go in which ultimately decide on what are the kind of policy choices that are finally made.
Typical indicator that I look at is the index of industrial production, because someone who has seen and always been dealing with productivity on a day-to-day basis, we find that the mining and all the other associated policies announced by the government, all of that is derived from what the productivity in mining is, which has a share in the index of industrial production. I believe it's almost 15%. Again, it's tied to employment. It's tied to investment as well. Foreign direct investment is something that the economy is always looking for capital coming in from abroad, and capital that stays in the economy. It's not flight capital like FII. The employment it creates, the technology it brings in. So there are a lot of multipliers attached to the index of industrial production, construction activity that's going on all across the country. All of that is tied to productivity that we can see in the 8 core industries. You mentioned about cement earlier. You need power to be running this, electricity for instance. And there is another indicator that I look at, which is a PMI, and we've been doing quite well. Anything above 50 in services and manufacturing is deemed very good. Is there any plan on the part of the ministry concerned? Because you want to be looking at survey reports. After all, that's exactly what you are doing. That can make the IIP a lot more interesting for journalists, for everyone who's relying on the information from the ministry to take key decisions.
Apart from the 3 indices of GDP, CPI and IIP, we are also working on an index of services production, an ISP. So that would help give an idea of what are the trends in the different services that are currently being produced and consumed in the country, and what is the changes that can expect. And as I mentioned, given that services are having a predominant role in the entire economy, that becomes a very important factor. Apart from the IIP, which is there, we also do what is called an annual survey of industries. So that gives a lot of granular information on the type of products that are being produced, the type of skill levels that industry is looking after, the kind of clusters which exist and which are very important to look at supply chains when we talk of where those supply chains can be developed, where road infrastructure might be required. And along with the annual survey of industries, which is focused on the formal sector, we have analysis of the informal sector, which is much larger both in terms of numbers, in terms of the number of people that are employed, and that gives us an idea of what is happening in the unincorporated sector or the informal sector, what are the kind of products that are being made out there, what are the kind of skill requirements that they have, and what are the kind of supplies that could be perhaps procured from there, and where maybe with an increase of skilling, it will help improve productivity also. So there are a number of bits and pieces of information that we have, and we work with the industries to try and tell them what is the information that is available. And that's why we do regularly stakeholder consultations with industry, with researchers, because a lot of the data is very useful for academicians and researchers who will bring out policy papers. And what we are ensuring is that the data gets disseminated in a manner which is transparent, in a manner which is easily accessible, and in a manner in which people can play around with the data. We have our portal which is called e-Sankhiki, where a lot of data visualizations can be done. You want to look at something about a specific product, how it has happened, you just feed it in, and we've got an artificial intelligence based chatbot in our portal, and you can just make a question or make a query to that, and they will come up with the kind of data that you have. So I would encourage your followers, whoever is digitally savvy, please go to the e-Sankhiki portal, play around with the data, look at what is it that is relevant for them, and in case they feel that it can be improved, we have a feedback form out there. We'll be very happy to improve our portal and our website so that it meets the requirements of people.
Well, we encourage all of you who are watching this podcast and listening to it to definitely give your feedback. My next question, Dr. Garg, is typically of anyone who is keyed in to all the economic data that's coming in, is a timing. We're all hungry for data. We want to know what's happening. IIP came out in the month of November. It was sub 4%, I believe. Now we are hungry for what's the next set of data that's going to come out. But I understand there's a lot of work that goes in. All that survey, all that collation of data, then of course you have to ensure it's accurate as well. So how do you meet the appetite of those who are hungry for the next data set to come out? Because they need to take a decision. And that's typically those who are investing in the stock market, they need to understand which company is doing what is their net profitability, what is their market like, which market can they do well, is the company in the right business cycle or not, for instance. So how do you ensure that data comes out on time and it released with the level of accuracy that it goes unchallenged?
I was talking about data dissemination and you talked about people in the stock market and others. In fact, for people who are wanting data on the go, we now have developed a mobile app. It's called GOI Stats. So I would encourage you to download it. And the first place we put out the data, we put it out in the portal and our mobile app. So at any time it's available. Timeliness of data is something that we focus on. As you mentioned, the CPI and IIP comes out monthly. It comes out CPI on the 12th of every month at 4 p.m. You can rest assured you will have the previous month's data. And within 12 days of the end of the month, we bring out the inflation numbers, which are among the fastest globally. Very few people do it as fast as we do. Similarly, when you talk of IIP, we bring it out on the 28th of every month. At 4 p.m. it will come out. And the IIP requires a lot of data from a lot of industry. And I must take this opportunity to thank industry for cooperating and collaborating with us and providing that data. Only because of the data that they give us, and let me assure them that it is kept anonymous. We never ever disclose from where we get the data. We anonymize it and then put it out in the thing, and that we bring it out on the 28th of every month. Similarly, for the GDP, we have an advance release calendar for the quarterly and the yearly. And in fact, we have an advance release calendar for all our major macroeconomic aggregates. And in all of them, our endeavor is to ensure that how we can do it as fast as possible. For monthly data, timelines are that ideally it should be within 15 days, but not more than 30 days we should bring it out because it depends on different data. Quarterly data, we endeavor to bring it out within 45 days of the end of the quarter. We might have to go to 60 days in some cases. And for annual data, within 90 days. We might have to go to 120 days in some cases. And these are standards that internationally are among top class, the best of class across the world. They are possible because we have a large army of people on the ground. And what is more important is the collaboration and the partnership that we have with households, with individuals, with retail shops, with industries, with all the informal enterprises who look at the National Statistics Office field enumerator and provide information to them. So I think we are blessed with having people on the ground and more importantly, the followers, consumers who are listening for their support and cooperation that we are able to bring out this data regularly. And obviously, robustness, accuracy is something that we constantly look at, are constantly upgrading our technology to ensure that we use the latest computational techniques, the latest artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies, and ensure that the data that we bring out presents the correct picture of India, the picture of the growth that you were talking about, the Goldilocks economy, the correct picture both for domestic purposes and international purposes.
So while our podcast is focused on the relevance and accuracy of data and stats coming out from the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, it's actually the robustness of it all which has come out from this podcast, how the surveys are being conducted so that all that data is collated into reliable and meaningful information for those who rely on it for their day-to-day decisions. We started with base revision of GDP, IIP and CPI, but what we have learned is behind the curtains what actually goes on. And I would like to thank Dr. Saurabh Garg, Secretary, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, for making it so simple for those who want to learn more about how key macroeconomic indicators are computed and why it is adjusted to the real world and it's meaningful in a real way. Thank you so much, Dr. Garg.
Thank you for having me.
You were listening to an exclusive interview with Dr. Saurabh Garg, Secretary, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, on upcoming revision of key economic indicators, GDP, IIP and CPI. Interviewer was Arjun J. Chaudhuri, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani.
Current Affairs.